My darlings, I see you, all of you. 4 signs tonight, and I want to begin with a promise I am going to keep rather than exaggerate, because the title of this reading is a large one, and I do not make promises like this lightly. The tables are about to turn for 4 zodiac signs, and I am taking them in a specific order this evening: Aries, Cancer, Aquarius, and Leo, ending with Leo, because Leo receives the strongest message in the whole of tonight's reading, and I would rather tell you that now than have you find it by accident in the last 4 minutes. But before I give you any of the 4, I want to tell you what turning actually means tonight, because I think the version most people expect is not the version that is coming, and I would rather correct that now than let you spend the next 40 minutes waiting for something that was never going to arrive in the shape you imagined. You are not going to watch anybody lose. I know that is not what the title implied, and I know a considerable portion of you clicked on this reading hoping for exactly that: a specific person finally getting what she deserves, humiliated in front of the very room that watched her diminish you. My darlings, I am not going to give you that, because in 35 years of watching this particular kind of turning actually happen, I have almost never seen it arrive that way, and I would rather tell you the true shape of it than sell you a satisfying lie. What is coming is something else, and I think, once you have heard the whole of it, you will find it considerably more valuable than the version you were hoping for. I am Madame Aurora, 35 years studying the stars from my office in Manhattan, and let me tell you what is actually turning, because it is real, permanent astrology, and it has a name that almost nobody uses correctly. Saturn keeps a ledger. Every other planet in the chart moves quickly enough to forget. Mercury changes its mind by the hour. The moon changes sign every 2.5 days. Even Jupiter, generous and expansive as it is, moves on to the next thing within about a year. Saturn does not forget. It is the slowest of the visible planets, taking roughly 29.5 years to complete a single circuit of the Zodiac. And the old astrologers who built this practice, watching that long, patient, unhurried movement, gave Saturn a specific job that none of the faster planets could do. It keeps account of what was endured, of what was carried without credit, of what was true and unfashionable and dismissed for longer than it should have been. And here is the part almost nobody tells you, my darlings, because most readings on this subject promise you revenge, and revenge was never Saturn's actual function. Saturn does not punish the people who wronged you. I want to say that plainly, at the very start, because I think it is the single most important sentence in this reading. Saturn settles the account that was opened in you, not in them. The turning I am describing tonight happens inside the 4 signs I am about to name, and whether the people who dismissed them ever notice, apologize, or even remember is, astrologically speaking, almost entirely beside the point. That is not a smaller kind of turning, my darlings. I want you to hear that clearly before we go any further, because I think it is actually the larger one, and I am going to spend the rest of this hour showing you why. Now let me show you the card, because it tells you exactly what the settling actually looks like, and I chose it specifically because everybody reads it as the same simple thing and misses the one detail that makes it useful. The card is the sun. A great, radiant sun fills most of the sky, a plain human face at its center, rays alternating straight and wavy streaming outward in every direction. Below it, a naked child, entirely unclothed, sits astride a large white horse, arms open, a red banner sometimes trailing behind. And along the bottom of the image, a row of tall sunflowers, facing upward toward the light. Everybody reads this card the same way, and I do not think the popular reading is wrong. Joy, vitality, success, plain and unambiguous, after a period of difficulty. That is genuinely what the card means, and I am not going to complicate it for the sake of complicating it. But look at the child, my darlings, because this is the detail I actually want you to keep. The child is naked, and I want you to sit with how deliberate that is, because in a deck full of figures wearing crowns, armor, elaborate robes, and carefully arranged symbols, this is the one figure with nothing on at all. Nothing to signal status, nothing to prove a position, no costume announcing to anyone watching that a victory has occurred. That is the whole of tonight's lesson, contained in a single image. The child is not performing triumph for an audience. There is no audience in that picture at all, apart from the sun itself, which does not require convincing of anything. The joy on that card is not a joy that needed anybody to witness it in order to be real. And notice the horse. White, moving forward, unhurried, and in most decks there is no visible rein pulling it in any particular direction, no evidence of the child straining to steer it toward anyone who might be watching. The child is not riding toward a crowd, she is simply riding, in the light, because the light is finally, fully hers to ride in. This is the specific shape of what is coming for tonight's 4 signs, my darlings, and I want you to release, right now, whatever picture you were holding of a dramatic public reversal, a room full of witnesses finally seeing the truth, a specific person's face falling as the tables turn in front of everyone. That is not this card. This card is a private, undeniable clarity that requires nothing external to confirm it, arriving after a period that did not feel like this at all. And the sunflowers, along the bottom, are the last piece. Sunflowers, my darlings, orient themselves toward the sun before it has even fully risen. They do not wait for the light to arrive and then decide to face it. They are already facing the direction it is going to come from, hours before it appears. I want you to hold that image loosely for now, because I am coming back to it at the very end, and it is going to matter more than you expect. Now let us begin. Let us go to Aries. My darling Aries, your ledger entry is about origin, and I want to tell you why. Because it is structural rather than incidental. You are the first sign of the entire zodiac. Not first alphabetically, first in the actual sequence, the point where the wheel itself begins, and your ruling planet, Mars, is the planet of the initial move, the first strike, the decision made before anybody else in the room has finished considering the question. That is a genuine gift, my darlings, and it means you are, more consistently than any other sign, the person who starts things. And here is the cost that comes with it, and I want to say it plainly because I do not think anybody has said it to you this directly before. A beginning is not the part of a project that gets remembered. The middle gets refined, and the end gets celebrated, and the beginning, the actual originating moment, the version that existed before it looked like anything worth crediting, is very often quietly written out of the story by the people who arrived once it had already become safe to join. You know this feeling, my darling. I do not need to describe the specific situation to you, because your sign carries a version of it more often than any other sign in this reading. You said it first, tried it first, believed in it before there was any evidence to justify believing, and somewhere in the retelling, the credit drifted toward whoever arrived once the risk had already been taken by somebody else. Saturn has been keeping the account of every single one of those moments, my darling, and I want to tell you what settling actually looks like for your sign specifically, because it is rarely dramatic. It is a return to the origin point. A person, unprompted, correctly attributing an idea to you years after everyone else stopped bothering to mention it. A door that opens specifically because somebody remembered, accurately, who actually started the whole thing. It will not come with fanfare, my darling, and it is not going to arrive as somebody publicly admitting they took credit that was not theirs. It arrives as the record, quietly, becoming accurate again. I want to add one thing for your sign specifically, because your particular danger is not giving up on the origin. It is starting the next thing so quickly that you never let the record catch up to the last one. Your ruler moves fast, my darling, and it moves forward, and your sign's instinct after being overlooked is very often to simply begin again, somewhere new, rather than staying present long enough for the correction to actually arrive. Some of what I am describing tonight requires you to remain, at least a little while longer, in the room where the original credit is owed, rather than already 3 projects further down the road by the time it finally comes looking for you. Now let me speak to Cancer. My darling Cancer, your ledger entry is about the labor nobody could see, and I think it is the heaviest of tonight's 4, because it has been accumulating the longest without you ever once being able to point at it. Your sign is ruled by the moon, which governs the emotional undercurrent of everything, the felt temperature of a room, the holding together of a family or a team or a friendship that is not visible in any minutes taken at a meeting. You are, more than any other sign, the person whose actual contribution cannot be written on a list, because it does not produce a document. It produces the fact that everyone else was able to function. And that is precisely why it goes uncredited, my darling, and I want you to understand the mechanism rather than simply feeling its effects. Credit, in most rooms, attaches to what can be pointed at. A decision made, a number achieved, a project delivered. Nobody writes down, "She is the reason nobody fell apart this year," because there is no box on a form for it, and the people who benefited from your holding very often do not fully register that it was work at all, because to them, it simply felt like the absence of a crisis, which they assumed was the natural state of things, rather than something you were actively maintaining. Saturn's settling for you, my darling, arrives in a very specific and rather painful shape, and I want to prepare you for it honestly rather than prettily. It very often arrives as absence. You step back, even briefly, from the holding you have always done without being asked, and the room, for the first time, feels what was actually being carried. Not because you withdrew it to make a point, though your sign has occasionally been tempted to do exactly that, but simply because a genuine rest revealed, by contrast, what had been quietly propping everything up. The account settles the moment the invisible becomes visible, by its absence rather than by anybody finally noticing it while it was present. Now, before I go to Aquarius, let me pause for a moment. If what I have said so far is landing, tap that little like button below this video. It is a small gesture and it does something real, which is tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who has been holding a room together for years without a single person noticing it was work. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment, because two signs remain, and Leo's is the strongest message in the entire reading. Now let me speak to Aquarius. My darling Aquarius, your ledger entry is about timing, and it is the strangest of tonight's four, because in your case the account does not settle through you changing at all. It settles because the world eventually changes to match what you already knew. Your sign is ruled, in the old tradition, by Saturn itself, and in the newer tradition by Uranus. And I want you to notice what an unusual combination that actually is, because it means your own sign is the one most directly governed by the very planet keeping tonight's ledger. Saturn gives you structure and patience. Uranus gives you a genuine capacity to see, clearly and often uncomfortably early, where things are actually heading, well before the evidence exists to convince anybody else. That combination has cost you, my darling, more than any of tonight's other three, because being early looks, from the outside, indistinguishable from being wrong. You have said things, believed things, built things, that were dismissed as strange, impractical, or simply too far ahead to take seriously, by people who were not incorrect about the present moment. They were only incorrect about how long the present moment was going to last. Saturn's settling for your sign, my darling, does not require you to do anything further at all. It requires time, which is the one resource your own ruling planet has always had in unlimited supply. The idea that seemed strange becomes ordinary. The structure you built ahead of the need for it becomes the structure everybody else is scrambling to build now. And I want to be honest with you about the specific quality of this particular turning, because it is not always sweet. You do not always get thanked for having been right early. Sometimes the world simply arrives where you already were and behaves as though it got there on its own. That is a real cost, and I would not ask you to pretend it isn't. But the account still settles, my darling, in the only currency that was ever actually available. You were right. The record eventually agrees with you, whether or not anybody hands you the credit for having arrived first. I want to say one further thing to your sign, because I think you carry a particular loneliness that the other three tonight do not. Being early means, for a period, having nobody to talk to about the thing you can already see, because the people around you genuinely have not arrived there yet, and are not being obtuse by failing to understand you. Your sign sometimes treats that gap as evidence of your own strangeness, rather than simply a difference in timing, and I would ask you to hold it more gently than that. You are not odd, my darling. You are early, and early is a position in time, not a flaw in character, and it resolves the moment enough time has actually passed, which it always, eventually does. And now let me speak to Leo, and I have saved you for last, because I promised you at the beginning that yours is the strongest message tonight, and I meant it. My darling Leo, your ledger entry is about substance mistaken for shine, and I think it is the one your sign has been carrying most silently of all, because admitting to it would mean admitting that the confidence people see was never the whole of what you actually brought. Your sign is ruled by the sun, and I do not think it is a coincidence that the very card I chose for tonight's reading carries your own ruler in its name. The sun does not orbit anything. It is the center, and everything else in the chart is measured against it. And that placement gives you a genuine, magnetic presence that draws a room toward you before you have said a single word of substance. And here is the cost, my darling, and I want to say it as plainly as I have said everything else tonight. People assume the presence is the whole of what you are offering. They see the light and conclude, often without examining the conclusion at all, that there cannot possibly be much underneath it, because a person who shines that easily surely has not had to build anything real to earn it. Your actual work, your actual thinking, your actual competence gets discounted before it is even properly looked at, filed under charisma rather than substance, and I think you have felt that discount your entire life without always being able to name it. Saturn's settling for you, my darling, is the one I most wanted to give you tonight, because it is going to arrive in a form your sign has never quite trusted before. A moment where the shine is genuinely, temporarily unavailable to you, where you cannot simply walk into a room and be believed on the strength of your presence alone, and where the only thing left standing is the actual substance underneath it. And it holds. My darling, that is the whole of your turning, not a room finally applauding you louder than before. A moment when the applause is entirely absent, and what you built is still, undeniably, there. Now let me give you 3 signs that your own account is already close to settling, because I do not want you leaving this reading with only a promise and no way to check it against your actual life. The first, you have stopped needing to explain it. There was a period, for most of you, in which you found yourself justifying the thing, over and over, to anyone who would listen, making the case, building the argument. If you have noticed, recently, that you no longer feel the pull to explain yourself the way you once did, that is not resignation, my darling. It is very often the first sign that some part of you has already settled the account privately, whether or not anybody else has caught up. The second, somebody new, who owes you nothing and has no stake in the old story, sees it accurately on first contact. This is worth paying attention to, because it is considerably more reliable than a long-standing acquaintance finally coming around. A person with no history in the matter, no old loyalty to protect, who simply looks at the situation as it currently stands and reads it correctly, is a sign that the truth of it is now visible on the surface, rather than requiring insider knowledge to see. And the third, which tends to arrive last. You feel something closer to quiet than to vindication when you imagine the old version of the story finally being corrected. If the fantasy of being proven right has lost its charge, my darling, if you notice you would rather simply move forward than watch anyone's face change, that is not indifference. It is very often the clearest evidence available that the account has already settled somewhere inside you, and that whatever happens with the people who once dismissed you has genuinely stopped being the point. Now, my darling, before I go on, do something with me. It takes 20 seconds and it works whatever your sign. Think of the specific thing, the origin nobody credited, the labor nobody saw, the early truth nobody believed, the substance nobody looked for underneath the shine, whichever one belongs to you. Now ask yourself, honestly, which of the 3 signs I just gave you is already true for you, even partially? You may find one, you may find none yet, and that is simply where you are in the settling, not a sign that it is not coming. Hold your answer. I am going to come back to it. Now let me tell you about Octavia. Octavia was an Aries client of mine, born in early April, who came to me some years ago about a company she had co-founded and then, in a manner of speaking, lost. She had been the one with the original idea, the actual technical insight that the whole business was eventually built around, developed alone, in her own time, over about 8 months before she brought in 2 partners to help build it into something larger. The partners were genuinely good at their parts of the work, she told me, careful to be fair to them even years later. But somewhere in the process of raising money and telling the story to investors, the founding narrative had quietly reshaped itself into something the 3 of them had arrived at together, simultaneously, in the same room, and Octavia's original 8 months alone had simply stopped being part of the account anybody gave. She left the company eventually, over a separate disagreement, and watched it succeed considerably. under a story that no longer included her origin in it at all. She told me she spent nearly 4 years wanting, more than the money, more than anything practical, for somebody, anybody, to simply say it accurately. She did think of it first. She built the actual insight alone, before either of the other two were involved. I asked her what she had tried, over those 4 years, to correct it. She had tried several things. A carefully worded message to one of the former partners, which went unanswered. A version of her own story told at an industry event, which she said had felt, even as she was telling it, faintly desperate. She had, at one especially low point, drafted a long post laying out the full timeline with dates, and never published it, because she said it read, on rereading, like exactly the kind of bitter correction that convinces nobody and simply confirms whatever unflattering story people already prefer. What actually shifted it, 4 years in, was considerably smaller than any of that. A younger engineer, newly hired at a different company, doing research on the technology Octavia's original insight had helped originate, found an old, obscure technical forum post from those 8 solitary months, with a timestamp, in Octavia's own words, describing the idea before either partner had ever heard of it. This person had no stake in the story. She simply found the evidence and, in a message to a mutual connection, mentioned it as an interesting historical footnote. Octavia told me that when she heard about it, secondhand, she felt something she had not expected at all, which was very little. Not nothing, she said, but considerably less than she had rehearsed feeling for 4 years. She said, I think I had been so ready to feel vindicated that when the actual moment came, quietly, through a stranger who did not even know it mattered to me, it just felt true. Not triumphant, true, and somehow that was more. Now, before I go on, let me pause for a moment. If Octavia's story landed somewhere true, if you recognized your own quiet forum post in it, tap that little like button below this video. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who has spent years wanting one accurate sentence from exactly the wrong person. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because I make these readings for every sign, and I make them so they can be found whenever somebody needs them, rather than only during a particular week. Wait, before I continue, I need to interrupt myself, because I know precisely what a portion of you is thinking, and I would rather deal with it directly than let it run underneath everything else. You are thinking, Aurora, this is lovely, but the specific people who wronged me are never going to see it, or say it, or correct anything, ever, and I do not know what to do with a promise of settling that does not include them. My darling, I want to answer that as honestly as I can, because I think a great many readings on this subject make a promise I am not willing to make to you tonight. I cannot tell you the specific people involved will ever apologize, acknowledge, or even privately reconsider their version of events. Some of them will not. I have watched this pattern for 35 years, and I would be lying to you if I said the account always settles with the original parties present and accounted for. Very often it does not. The partner who took the credit may never say a word about it for the rest of her life. The room that dismissed you may simply move on, unbothered, having never once revisited the question. I told you at the very start of this reading that Saturn's ledger is not primarily about them, and I want to return to that now, because I think it is the actual answer to what you are asking. The settling I have described tonight is not contingent on their participation. Octavia's 4 years did not end because her former partners finally admitted anything. They have, as far as she knows, never mentioned it. What settled was inside her, produced by a piece of evidence she happened to encounter through somebody who had no idea it mattered. If you are waiting for the specific people to be the ones who deliver your settling, my darling, you may be waiting a very long time, and I do not think that particular wait is one I should encourage. What I can promise you is narrower and, I believe, more reliable. The record becomes accurate somewhere, to somebody, eventually, whether or not the original parties are ever part of that correction. And the internal settling, the quiet that replaces the old, tired need to keep explaining yourself, is available to you regardless of what anybody else ever does or says, which makes it, in my experience, the only part of this entire process that was ever actually within your control. I want to be honest about one more layer of this, because I think it matters, and I have never had much patience for readings that skip the uncomfortable part. Some of you are going to feel real anger hearing me say this, at the unfairness of a settling that does not include a reckoning for the person who actually caused the harm. That anger is legitimate, my darling, and I am not going to tell you to transcend it on a schedule that suits this reading better than it suits you. Feel the whole of it, for as long as it genuinely takes. What I am telling you is only that waiting for their reckoning as the precondition for your own peace hands them one further year, or 5, or 15, of continued control over your life, which is a considerably higher price than most of them were ever worth. Now let me tell you the other kind of story, because I have told you the one where the settling felt clean. Philippa was a Cancer client of mine who came to me over a period of some years, and I want to tell her story carefully because it did not resolve neatly, and I think that makes it more useful rather than less. She had spent the better part of 11 years as the person who held her extended family together, organizing every gathering, remembering every birthday, managing the slow, careful diplomacy required to keep several strong-willed relatives from permanently falling out with each other. Nobody had asked her to do this formally. It had simply become hers, the way it becomes somebody's in nearly every family, and she had done it, by her own description, largely without complaint, for over a decade. 2 years before she came to me, she stepped back. Not dramatically, not as a punishment, but genuinely, because a health difficulty had made the constant managing simply impossible to continue at the level she had been maintaining it. And the family, she told me, did not fall apart the way some quiet part of her had almost hoped it might, in the specific way a person sometimes hopes to be proven necessary. It simply became quieter. Gatherings happened less often. 2 relatives who had been on reasonably good terms, thanks to years of Philippa's careful management, drifted into a low-grade coolness that nobody actively addressed. Nothing collapsed. It simply thinned, gradually, in a way that was, by her own account, almost harder to point to than an outright falling out would have been. I asked her whether anyone in the family had connected the thinning to her absence. She said one person had, once, in passing, said something like, "Things were easier when you used to organize everything," and then the conversation had moved on to something else entirely within about 30 seconds. That was it, my darling Cancers. That was the entire acknowledgement, across 2 years, of 11 years of invisible labor. One sentence, said in passing, immediately followed by a change of subject. Philippa told me she had genuinely expected, when she first stepped back, that the contrast would produce something clearer, a real conversation, perhaps even an apology for how much had gone unnoticed. What she got instead was thinner, quieter, and in some ways harder to sit with than either a dramatic collapse or a dramatic acknowledgement would have been, because it left her holding the truth of what she had done for 11 years almost entirely alone, with only one half-finished sentence from somebody else to confirm it. I want to be honest with you about what I told her, because it is the same thing I want to tell you now. The account had settled, my darling. Not the way she had pictured it settling, and not in a form that gave her the satisfaction she had quietly been hoping for. But she knew, with a clarity she had not previously had access to, exactly what she had been carrying, and exactly what its absence revealed, and that knowledge, however thinly acknowledged by anybody else, was hers now in a way it had not been before. She told me, some months later, that she had stopped waiting for the family to say it properly, and had found, to her genuine surprise, that she no longer minded quite as much as she had expected to. Pause with me for a moment. I know this has been a great deal. If this reading is bringing you something tonight, would you do me 3 small things? Like this video. It tells YouTube this matters to real people, and it carries it to somebody who stepped back once, quietly, and got one half-finished sentence in return for 11 years. Subscribe and turn on the bell if you have not, because I make these readings for every sign, and I intend to keep making them. And write to me in the comments, and I want the specific thing rather than the general thing. Tell me your sign, and tell me which of the 4 this is for you. The origin nobody credited, the labor nobody saw, the early truth nobody believed, or the substance nobody looked for underneath the shine. And if you have been here a while, Membership on this channel means readings reach you before they are published, and it means you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first, and I answer there more often and more personally than I am able to anywhere else. Now let me give you the practical part, because a promise without a method is only a comfort, and I would rather give you something to actually do with the account that is settling. There are 4 things, and they apply across all 4 of tonight's signs, though each will find a different one hardest. The first, write the account down, in full, once, honestly, in your own words, not to send it anywhere, simply so that the true version exists somewhere outside your own memory, in a form that does not depend on your recalling it perfectly on demand. Octavia's 4-year-old forum post is precisely this kind of document, written for no strategic reason at all, and it turned out to be the very thing that eventually spoke for her. The second, stop auditioning the correction to people who have already shown you they are not going to give it. Octavia's unanswered message to her former partner cost her something real, and it did not need to. Notice who has already demonstrated, through years of silence or deflection, that they are not the source your settling is going to come from, and redirect the energy you have been spending on them toward literally anything else. The third, practice receiving the small, offhand acknowledgments without needing them to be larger. Philippa's one sentence, followed by a change of subject, was easy to dismiss as insufficient, and in a narrow sense it was. But it was also real, and a person who requires every acknowledgement to arrive at full size will miss the many small, genuine ones that are actually available. The way Octavia nearly missed the significance of a second-hand mention from a stranger, because it did not look like the vindication she had rehearsed. And the fourth, which is the one I most want you to take from this reading. Notice, honestly, whether you are still explaining. If you catch yourself, in a conversation, building the case again, laying out the timeline again, for an audience that has heard it several times already, ask yourself gently what that repetition is actually for. Sometimes it is genuinely useful. Very often, my darlings, it is a sign the account has not yet settled inside you, whatever the external situation has done, and the settling I have described tonight is available to you the moment you are ready to stop making the case and simply let the record be what it is. Let me speak briefly to a few dimensions, because this settling shows up differently depending on where it lives. At work, which is Octavia's dimension, the settling most often arrives through a record rather than a person, an old document, an email thread, a piece of correspondence that quietly proves what actually happened. Keep your own records, my darlings, even when you have no plan for them. You very rarely know in advance which ordinary Tuesday's paperwork is going to matter in 4 years. In family, which is Philippa's dimension, the settling is nearly always thinner and quieter than you want it to be, and I would ask you to lower your expectation of its size rather than its likelihood. Families rarely deliver a full accounting. They deliver a half sentence, said in passing, and the half sentence is real even though it is not enough, and learning to let it be real without needing it to be enough is most of what peace in this particular dimension actually requires. In friendship, the settling often arrives through time rather than through confrontation. A friendship that quietly rebalances itself once one party stops overextending, without either person ever naming what happened. Notice the rebalancing rather than waiting for the naming, and in your own private sense of yourself, which is, in the end, where every one of tonight's 4 accounts actually settles regardless of where it began. If nothing external ever changes, the internal settling I have described tonight, the stopping of the explaining, the quiet where the vindication fantasy used to live, remains entirely available to you, and it is, I want to say plainly, worth pursuing on its own, even if you never receive a single external acknowledgement for the rest of your life. Now let me give you the ritual, and it is short, and it uses the image I gave you at the very beginning of this reading. Find 20 minutes, somewhere you will not be interrupted. A gold candle for the sun if you like one, and if you have none, my darling, it changes nothing, because the object was never the mechanism. The mechanism is the account itself, finally written down in full. Take a sheet of paper, and at the top, write the heading, What Actually Happened. Write the true account, plainly, without performing it for an imagined reader, without softening it for anybody's comfort, and without sharpening it for anybody's outrage either. Simply what happened, in the order it happened, including the parts that do not flatter anybody involved, including you. When it is finished, read it once, aloud, to the empty room. And then write, underneath it, one final sentence. This is true, whether or not anybody else ever says so. That sentence, my darlings, is the whole of tonight's ritual, and I want to tell you why it matters more than it appears to. You have been waiting, in one form or another, for permission to consider the account settled, and the permission you have been waiting for was never actually available from outside, the way Octavia discovered, and the way Philippa is still, slowly, discovering. This sentence is you granting it to yourself, in your own handwriting, which is the only signature that was ever actually going to be required. Keep the page. Do not destroy it. Put it somewhere private and read it again on the day, months, or years from now, when you catch yourself explaining the old story one more time to somebody who has already heard it, and let it remind you that the case was closed some time ago, by the only judge who was ever actually presiding over it. Now, my darlings, let me give you the thing I have been building toward the whole of this hour. Do you remember the child in the card? Naked, riding forward, no audience in the picture except the sun itself, no reins visible pulling toward anyone who might be watching. I told you to hold that image loosely, because I would come back to it, and here is why. The turning you were hoping for at the start of this reading was a turning with an audience, a room, watching, as the truth finally became undeniable to everyone in it at once. I understand why that is the version most of us picture, my darlings, because it is the version that would settle not only the account but the humiliation alongside it, all in one satisfying, witnessed moment. That is almost never how it actually goes, and I told you so honestly at the very beginning, rather than letting you discover it disappointed 40 minutes in. What actually happens, in the overwhelming majority of the cases I have watched across 35 years, looks considerably more like that naked child on the white horse. Quiet, private, requiring no witness at all in order to be completely, finally real. Octavia's settling arrived through a stranger who did not know it mattered. Philippa's arrived through half a sentence, immediately abandoned for another topic. Neither of those moments had an audience in the sense either woman had originally wanted, and both of them, my darlings, were still, unmistakably, the turning. I think the reason we all picture the version with witnesses is that we are, understandably, still hoping for something more than the settling itself. We want the humiliation of whoever wronged us folded into the reward, delivered as a package, so that being right and seeing them lose arrive in the same moment. My darling, I am not going to tell you that never happens, because occasionally it does. But building your whole account around waiting for that particular package is, in my experience, the single most reliable way to miss the settling when it actually arrives, because it will very often arrive in the quieter form, and a person watching only for the dramatic version will walk straight past the real one without recognizing it. Now let me give you the sunflowers, because this is the part I most want you to keep. They face the sun before it has risen, my darlings, not after. Before, hours in advance, oriented already toward a light that has not yet appeared over the horizon. I want you to consider, for a moment, who in your own life has already been facing you this way, quietly, before your own settling arrived, before you had any external proof to offer them that you deserved it. The friend who believed you without needing the corroborating evidence. The person who took your side before the record was corrected, on the strength of nothing but knowing you. Those people were never waiting for the sun to rise before turning toward it. They were already oriented, and their orientation was never contingent on the settling I have described tonight actually occurring. That is worth more, my darlings, than the whole of the vindication you have been picturing. The people who required the public reversal in order to finally see you accurately were never actually going to give you what you were looking for, even if the reversal arrived exactly as dramatically as you imagined it. And the people who were already facing you, sunflower-like, before any of this settled, do not need the settling at all. They already had the accurate account. Saturn's ledger, in the end, is mostly for you, my darling. The people who mattered were reading it correctly the whole time. Go and thank one of them this week, my darlings, if you can manage it. Not with a speech, and not by explaining the whole account to them one more time, since they were the ones who never needed the explanation in the first place. Simply tell them, plainly, that you noticed. A settling this quiet deserves at least one moment of being spoken aloud to somebody who already knew, and I think you will find it lands considerably more meaningfully there than any correction ever could have landed with somebody who was never going to believe you regardless of the evidence. My darlings, before I let you go, 3 small things. 1. If any part of this reading found you tonight, if you recognized your own ledger entry in one of the 4, if Octavia's forum post or Philippa's half a sentence landed somewhere real, tap that like button. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who has been waiting for a dramatic reversal that was never actually coming in the form she pictured. 2. Subscribe and turn on the bell. I make these readings for every sign, and I make them so they can be found whenever somebody needs them, rather than only during a particular week. If you become a member, readings reach you before they are published, and you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first. 3. And this is the one I care about most. Which of the 4? Not the story, not the person, simply which one. The origin, the labor, the timing, or the substance. I read every single comment, truly, and I want to tell you why I am asking for so little. Because a comment section full of 40 women, each naming one word, is a room full of people quietly confirming to each other that the account exists and has been noticed, which is closer to the settling this whole reading has been describing than any amount of detail could manage. And if this reading gave you something and you ever want to say thank you more directly, a super thanks is never expected and always felt, and it is a genuine part of how I keep making these readings as carefully as I make them. If you know somebody who is still explaining herself to a room that stopped listening years ago, send this to her tonight. You may not realize how much a single share matters. It is how this work finds the person who needs it. Thank you, my darlings. This community has become something I genuinely did not expect when I began. The tables are about to turn for 4 zodiac signs. That is the title, and I want to close by telling you exactly what I mean by it, because it is not what you thought when this hour began. It does not mean the people who dismissed you are about to lose something in front of a room that finally sees them clearly. Some of them will. Most of them, honestly, will simply continue, unbothered, exactly as they always have. And I told you that at the start because I would rather you heard it from me than discovered it alone, disappointed, some months from now. It means the account, kept faithfully by the slowest and most patient planet in the whole of the chart, settles inside you, quietly, without requiring their participation, their apology, or even their awareness that anything has changed at all. Aries, through the origin finally, accurately, remembered. Cancer, through the absence that finally revealed the weight of what you had been carrying. Aquarius, through time itself agreeing with what you always knew. And Leo, my darling, through the moment the shine goes quiet and what is underneath it holds anyway. You are the naked child on the white horse, my darlings, riding forward in the light. And there was never actually a crowd in that picture. There was only ever the sun, which required no convincing, and which was always, quietly, already yours. I am Madame Aurora from Manhattan, and I love you, all 12 signs of the Zodiac. I will see you in the next reading.